Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you here. And thank you for joining us, the side event, 25 Years of the Women and Peace and Security Agenda, Maintaining Progress Across Pillars of the MIND Action. My name is Nana Nagai, First Secretary of the Delegation Japan to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. Today, I'm delighted to moderate this side event organized by the Gender Diversity Working Group. This year marks 25th anniversary of the WPS agenda since its adoption, and the WPS agenda recognized the role of the MIND actions in the text of the UN Security Council resolutions. In the Semi-Up Action Plan adopted at the 5th Review Conference last November acknowledges for the first time the contribution of the MIND actions to the WPS agenda within an APNBC action plan for the very first time. Japan is strongly promoting the WPS agenda as a part of its main foreign policy, and as you may know, the strengthening the synergy between the WPS agenda and MIND action is one of the priorities during Japan's presidency of this year. This side event provides an opportunity to highlight the importance of the Women, Peace and Security agenda across all aspects of MIND action. You will hear directly experiences and initiatives from the panelists and have an opportunity to explore ways to strengthening synergies between implementation and the convention, implementation of the convention and the WPS agenda. Today, we have 4 esteemed panelists joining this side event and 1 participating remotely. Before we start presentation by each panel, let me allow to read out opening remarks my ambassador, Ms. Tomiko Ichikawa, Ambassador of Japan and the President of the 22nd of the State Parties meeting. Ambassador was looking forward to attending this side event, but unfortunately she is not available today. So I'd like to share her sincere apologies for not being able to be here today. So I will read out. Distinguished delegates, I'm very pleased to say a few words at the opening of the side events on an important topic. I would like to thank Gender and Diversity Working Group for organizing this side event and its contributions. Japan is a strong supporter of the WPS agenda in this important year, marking 25th anniversary since the UN Security Council resolution. Japan, together with Norway, serves as a co-chair of the WPS Focal Points Network. We hosted a meeting of this network in February this year in Tokyo. As the APNBC president this year, one of Japan's priorities is to strengthen the synergy between the APNBC and the WPS agenda. At the 5th Review Conference of the Convention last November, state parties adopted the Semi-Up Anchor Political Declaration and the Action Plan 2025 to 2029, in which the importance of the synergies with relevant international frameworks, including the WPS agenda, was highlighted. In the upcoming intersessional meeting of the APNBC in June this year, one of the 2 thematic discussions will focus on strengthening the synergies between the APNBC and the WPS agenda through concrete actions. Looking forward to today's presentations and discussion, and I hope to continue our engagement on the WPS agenda in June. Thank you so much. And with this now, it's with a great pleasure that I introduce our esteemed panelists. We have Ms. Jean Munro, Advisor for Gender Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion of GICHD. It's from my side, sorry. She has over 20 years' experience for supporting efforts to advance gender mainstreaming and women empowerment across different sectors. And second speaker is joining later remotely, Miss Abuku Makul Kachano, female designer of the Danish Refugee Council in South Sudan, and she is joining later. And third speaker is Miss Benedict Santoir, a graduate professional with the Gender and the Disarmament program at UNIDIR. She's a researcher and independent consultant in the area of the feminist foreign policies and humanitarian disarmament and so on. And the last speaker is Miss Vladislava Vishnokova, sorry, my pronunciation, Mine Action Strategy Lead at the Mine Action Office of the Ministry of the Economy of Ukraine. She is managing a team responsible for coordination in the land release, risk education, standardizations, and gender and inclusion aspects. So today, following the presentations panels, I'll have a Q&A session where I invite everyone to participate in. So now I would like to invite Jane from the GICHD for her presentation. Jane, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning to speak on such an important topic. Thank you very much, Nana, for the introduction, and I look forward to my fellow to the interventions from my fellow panelists. What I'm going to speak about this morning is what actually is the WPS agenda. What do we mean when we talk about that? And what are the synergies that it has with Mine Action? And finally, why is it important that we put these two agendas much closer together? So before I start, I'd love to hear from yourselves just by raising your hands. In the countries that you're working in, maybe if you think that the two frameworks are really well connected, you can put your hand up with a 5. If they're not at all connected, you can go down to a 0. So rating with your hands, your country is really well connected, the two frameworks, or a 0. We've got a 4, we've got a 4s. 4s, 1s, 2s, 0s. Great, okay. And then from a personal view, how strongly do you feel you're able to articulate why these two frameworks need to come together? Again, 5, I can do it in my sleep, no problem. 0, I don't know what you're talking about. 5s, 2s, 3s. At the back of the room, 3s and 4s. Excellent, okay. We've got a great range of people here. So my role is to actually give you this background because the other panelists are going to go really deep into different parts of the WPS agenda. I'm just going to give you that background. So essentially, it is one of the strongest frameworks that we have that indicates that we need strong decision-making in the peace building and reconstruction sector. It came about in 2000 under UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and has since been strengthened through a number of other different resolutions. But in essence, it's about having women in senior decision-making positions. It's about recognizing that women are discriminately affected by conflict. And it calls on member states to take action. And there's 4 main areas of action. The first one is participation. So it talks about the importance of having women in senior decision-making positions, and it calls on member states to ensure to have those women in senior decision-making positions as a key part of conflict resolution and peace building. It also calls on ensuring that there's support for local peace initiatives. So grassroots women's organizations need to be part of peace building initiatives. The second pillar is protection. Again, recognizing that conflict has a distinct effect on women and girls, and particularly in internally displaced peoples, women are very much affected by that, and this needs to be recognized by member states. The third area is prevention, and this came about with the recognition that women were often not at the table in conflict negotiations, in peace building, and that they had a key role to play. And the fourth pillar is relief and recovery. So in the inclusive mine action, we have our 5 areas that we work in. And I want to show how the WPS agenda, when we have that lens, how it can enhance the mine action area. So first of all, it calls for equal participation of women in mine action at the national, local, and community level. And research is showing that when we have gender-balanced demining teams, when we have gender-balanced community liaison efforts, we have better access to discriminated communities. And it calls on the need to challenge our structural, technical, and societal obstacles for women's meaningful participation. Under protection, it talks about the need, it talks about recognizing that landmines and cluster munitions have a different impact, or people have different exposures to ERWs, and this needs to be recognized. Member states need to address this when they're designing their programs. Under prevention, this specifically links the advocacy aspect of mine action as well as the EORE, risk education aspect of mine action, and that calls on that key need to bring those two together. And finally, the last one is relief and recovery, calling for women to be key in the redesign of communities that have gone through conflict, and that they need to be a key part of the surveys, the land clearance aspects as well. So why do we need this strong link between the two? So there's four main reasons. The first is that it will improve the effectiveness of programs. We know that having women's involvement will improve the responsiveness of the types of programs that are being implemented, better access, there will be better access to affected groups when we have female deminers and educators, and will ensure that the clearance priorities are set by women's priorities. The second reason is that it will bring about equity and inclusion by addressing the structural inequalities and empowering women, by ensuring that services for women survivors and caregivers are there, and it will also expand the economic opportunities for women. Thirdly, and importantly in this current political context, is it supports our global commitments. So by bringing these two together, we'll be reaching the WPS resolutions, SDGs 5 and 16, and our disarmament treaties. This boosts accountability within each country, but importantly, it also boosts the confidence of donors. And finally, by linking the two, we'll be advancing peace and security. This will improve our inclusive governments as well as social cohesion, and it'll showcase women's role in leadership and peace-building roles. So in conclusion, by linking these two frameworks, our programming will be much more effective, it'll be inclusive, it'll be aligned with global norms, and it'll be a driver of sustainable peace. So I hope that's giving you some of the grounding that now my other panelists can go much deeper into different aspects of mine action, as well as countries that have made the link between the two strongly. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for providing the overview of the how the WPS agenda and mine action is interlinked, and also why stronger links between two is necessary. And now I would like to invite Ms. Abuk Makul Kachano. She's participating in online. So, Abuk, you have the floor.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Abuk Makur Kachwal, a female deminer from DRC, South Sudan. Thanks for taking your time to be here today. Today, I'll be walking you through women, peace, security, roles, and women network in mine action. As you know, women play a crucial roles in mine action, contributing to the safety, recovery, rebuilding of communities affected by landmines. These roles can be categorized as follows. Women are often primary caregivers and educators in their communities. Their involvement in spreading knowledge helps to reduce accidents and increases safety within their households and neighborhoods. Demining operations. While traditionally male-dominated, women are increasingly involved in demining activities. They work alongside men in both technical and non-technical roles, such as survey teams, mine detection, and the clearance of explosive remnants of war. Peace building and conflict resolution. In post-conflict settings, women often lead efforts to rebuild communities, negotiate peace, and ensure that gender considerations are included in reconstruction process. Women network in mine action. The purpose of this network is to create a platform that empowers national women in mine action sector. Activities advocate for mechanisms that ensure the safety, dignity, respect of women in the workplace, including addressing issues like sexual harassment or exploitation. Donor engagement. This network may often help attract donors' interest in gender-sensitive programs. Reduce isolation. Female professionals, especially in remote areas, can feel isolated. Therefore, network fosters a sense of community and shared purposes. Empowerment and representation, as I am doing now. It helps women in mine action develop skills, take on more senior roles, and influence policy. Gender-sensitive mine action, inclusive approaches, women's experience and needs differ in post-conflict areas. This network may help. This includes may help ensure these are included in mine risk education, victim assistance, and clearance operations. This network is also everywhere in the sector, including cooks, cleaners, medics, and it is not only for female deminers, it's all for ladies that are all in mine action sector. Whether you're being a medic, whether being a cook, whether being a cleaner, it's all for everyone. Therefore, women, peace, security roles in mine action contributes all across pillar, clearance, risk education, victim assistance. Their participation enhances community outreach, inclusive decisions making, and improves the effectiveness of the program. Women's network in mine action play a key role in empowering female professionals, promoting gender sensitive policies, and facilitating knowledge sharing. With all, this is all I have to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Abak, for sharing your experience and initiatives to enhance women's participations in mine action, as well as the challenges faced by the female practitioners who are working in South Sudan. Now I would like to turn to Ms. Benedict Santoir from UNIDIR. You have the floor.
Is that it? No. Yeah, that's me. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy and privileged to be with you here today next to such wonderful women mine action experts. I'm happy to present an overview of an ongoing research on women, peace and security, and victim assistance that I'm leading at UNIDIR. And so as this is a work in progress, the goal is to get feedback, inspiration, and thought-provoking discussion with the audience. So for many years, researchers and practitioners alike have argued for better synergies between mine action and women, peace and security agenda. As Jean showed us earlier, there are many good reasons to do so. So far, however, the focus has been mainly on women's participation in mine action, notably in survey and clearance operation, which are, as you know, male-dominated sectors. So risk education, advocacy, and victim assistance tend to be a bit more gender balanced, but there is still a lot of work to do. And in the last 2 decades, the mine action sector and its frameworks, action plans, and programs progressively improved at mentioning gender-specific language over time. And at the 5th review conference of the APMBC in November 2024, state parties agreed to adopt the Siem Reap Encore Action Plan and Declaration, as you know. And in both documents, states parties recognize explicitly for the first time the importance of synergies with other international frameworks like the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. But what does it mean exactly in practice? What would a WPS approach to VA entail? And why does this integration matter in the first place? So the WPS agenda, as you know, maybe not, is built on decades of feminist advocacy and scholarships. And they clearly demonstrated that violence is multidimensional, and it exists on a continuum with adversity and violence persisting in the aftermath of conflict. And this includes, obviously, survivors of explosive remnants of war who face the deadly legacies of war and conflict even decades after. So here I am going to present tentative links to what a WPS approach to VA would look like, organized around each pillar of women, peace, and security. So participation, protection, prevention, and relief and recovery. So first, the participation pillar. When applying a WPS approach to VA, a rather obvious element is to ensure that survivors themselves, including their families and their care providers, are included and can meaningfully participate on decision-making, on VA policies and programming. Then another rather obvious element, I think, is providing capacity building and training on gender-sensitive VA for care providers. And more broadly, at the policy level, integrating a gender lens in mine action strategies and national action plans, and vice versa, also including mine action in WPS National Action Plan, is really essential to continue avoiding seeing these things as existing in silo. So there are definitely national action plans right now doing this already, like in Ukraine, for example, but globally, these two things, WPS and mine action, continue to be seen as two separate things. Second is the protection pillar. So there is a lot of research already that has been done on gender-sensitive victim assistance. So I don't want to repeat all that here, but clearly we know empirically that even when faced with the same type of injuries, different populations have different needs and face different repercussion of their injuries. So naturally, conducting a gender-sensitive needs assessment for survivors and their families, including the social stigma and the increased risks of violence they encounter, will help better serve them and deliver better services overall. Now, what is interesting from a WPS lens or perspective, let's say, and to my knowledge, there is not a lot of research on this, but it would be really interesting and important to understand better the mutually reinforcing forms of oppression, like gender, disability, class, race, but also how different types of violence intersect. For example, is there a correlation between a CRSV, so conflict-related sexual violence, and landmine injuries? A WPS approach to VA would also be an opportunity to include the security sector, for example, by training them and also first responders on gender-sensitive mine action and victim assistance more precisely. The third pillar of WPS is the prevention pillar. So to avoid injuries in the first place, strengthening explosive risk ordnance education with gender-sensitive approaches is essential. And so is centering the voices, expertise, and experiential knowledge of women survivors as both direct and indirect victims as a preventive measure. And while this is important for all pillars of WPS and all pillars of humanitarian mine action, right? Always collecting disaggregated data when feasible is crucial because it also allows the identification of gender, age, and other identity-related risks, needs, and outcomes. So I think, again, this can clearly be seen as a preventive measure. So finally, the fourth pillar of WPS is relief and recovery, and we can again see here a beautiful harmony with mine action and specifically victim assistance. There are many links and do share if you are thinking of others that I have listed here, but for example, providing gender-inclusive healthcare, promoting economic empowerment programs for women and girl survivors, supporting survivor-centered organization, and then thinking also about land release initiatives in a way that they could potentially redress inequalities between men and women after war, for example, in terms of inheritance and land ownership laws. Again, these are only examples of what a WPS approach to victim assistance would look like, but the key words here are synergies and a holistic approach. So I think a WPS approach to VA forces us to think about mine action in a holistic manner. And to end on this, if I can summarize the argument of my presentation, is that the objectives of victim assistance and women, peace, and security agenda are mutually reinforcing. So a barrier to one becomes a barrier to the other. And let me wrap up with this and explain what I mean. So empirical evidence in the literature clearly shows that access for landmine victims to timely and appropriate healthcare services, mental support, and inclusive education is an important precursor for women and girls' socioeconomic inclusion. And this in turn fosters resilience and empower survivors to heal after their injuries and after conflict. And there is another way to look at it also. Barriers to accessing those timely and appropriate medical and psychosocial services hinder the ability to live a life with dignity, simply put. Consequently, we must understand these barriers as obstacles to advancing the women, peace, and security agenda itself. Because how can women and girls survivors, whether as direct or indirect victims, engage in peace processes, for example, or security decision-making, or contribute to the flourishing of their communities when they cannot return to a safe and fulfilling life where their basic needs and those of their families remain unmet? So I guess that is the reflection I would like to leave you with, and I thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you for Benedict for explaining what WPS lens can bring to the victim assistance, and your insight on how the victim assistance aligns with all the 4 pillars of the WPS agenda are very particularly valuable. So now the last presenter of this event is Ms. Bratislava Vishnukova, sorry, from Ukraine, and the overview of how the gender considerations in Ukraine mine action sector have evolved, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to follow the previous speakers and to bring a wider discussion to an example of a country. Well, the story of mine action in Ukraine is the story of transformation under pressure. Before 2014, it was mostly the residual contamination management of what was left after the world wars. But when Russia invaded in 2014, we were facing a much more serious challenge. That's when you could see NGOs starting to establish their mine action programs in Ukraine. You can see in the dark red the areas that have been subject to the Russian invasion at the time, and that's where the humanitarian crisis was brought up and the mine action challenge for the period of 2014 to 2022. As evident, it was spread onto 2 regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, but 2022 has changed everything. The scale of contamination simply exploded. The urgency, the stakes, the human cost, all of it grew beyond what the system could comprehend and beyond anything that we had seen before. We still didn't have to build the mine action system from scratch. It was there, but we needed scale, we needed speed, efficiency, and better coordination. Having to do that, and as we were adapting the system, we had a rare chance to build better and to have a look at who has been forgotten, left behind, or outside of the focus, and why did that happen? And that's where also women come in. Well, this will not be the story of zero to hero, because neither it is a tremendous success story. It is rather a description of how we brought into the systematic focus what can be easily overlooked when battling immense challenges? Well, women have been present in mine action in Ukraine since the very beginning. And the spotlight, however, dependent on the commitment of the individuals who have been devoted to the topic, on particular partners and donors who have been pushing for the inclusion of women, like we have our partners of Japan and Canada in here, and organizations who has been having it as their focus. These were very sporadic projects and connections, with no links to other sectors or documents. This was the case for the whole mine action, not just the gender aspect, because it has functioned, as most of the mine action programs do, quite in isolation. So how did we start shifting? First of all, we started with institutionalizing our goal. We have put gender in the National Mine Action Strategy as a principle. Therefore, it includes women as a prerequisite, as the goal, and as the means of achieving safety. It is also followed by the implementation plan that outlines the specific tasks to be followed, and it highlights the indicator of how we can see whether we are achieving our goals. Now, it is very clear that quantity does not mean quality, and we will come back to that later. But when it comes to institutions and strategic documents in the system, that's how you can bring it about. And that's also something we see in the CM REAP and Core Action Plan, where the levels of national ownership should be shown through the strategic documents. And except for that, it has also a few other important outcomes. First of all, it institutionalizes the aspect of women in mine action. Secondly, it signals to the sector that this is one of the topics we should work on. And thirdly, it creates the foundation for the partners to direct their projects, their funds, and their efforts to particular topics or integrating the women aspects into their projects. We have heard quite often during this NDM session the question of how do we mobilize resources for the aspects that are not land release? Well, by integration and also by showing through the institutional documents to the partners that that is something that's important for you, showing them the framework. The second step is putting women on the agenda. Now, again, I've said women have been participating in mine action, and I will build on what Benedict has said, because in Ukraine, the explosive ordnance risk education and victim assistance, it has been working quite well catering to the needs of women, taking women to the perspective. And every organization, when it was gender disaggregation or any other aspects, they've been quite active and compliant in that. But we were thinking more about the employment in mine action. And before that, before we institutionalized it and before we created a platform, talking about women in mine action has been kind of like clearance. You have to be moving very slowly, very cautiously, and being quite cautious of triggering somebody in the room, especially when it's an interagency meeting or when there is other important questions on land release and the speed of clearance. Therefore, there was the question of where do you come to ask for questions? Where do you come to ask for support? Where you can get the experience, who can help you out, and where you can actually bring it up. And that's why we decided to create the initiative group on gender aspects in mine action, where unapologetically, stakeholders can gather to discuss specifically this particular item. Now, please make no mistake, we also have other places to discuss victim assistance, people with disabilities, explosive ordnance survivors, veterans, and many others. But this one is specifically to bring up the question of women. Now you can see here that we have united efforts with DRC in Ukraine and Canada to bring this about and to work on this together. In the participants, we have, well, mostly representative of everything, starting from the operators, the Mine Action Authority, the commercial organizations, the NGOs, the training centers, anyone who can have a relationship to this, and including the representatives of other organizations, like Gender and Humanitarian Action. What is this group supposed to do? First of all, it's a platform to keep gender in focus. When you have the regular meetings, when you have a regular agenda, when you know that there are people responsible to bring this topic up, it will not be just appearing when there is funding or when there is the National Women's Day or whatever else. It will always be there, and we ensure consistency. Secondly, it is the way to collaborate, coordinate, and together ensure that the quantitative indicators that we have will be turned into the quality. And we will deliver the environment where women will not only have to, but will want to work in, and that will want to join and stay in. Therefore, this is also a place for experience sharing, since we bring about different organizations, the ones that have been working in Ukraine since 2014, the ones that have been active in Mine Action since the 90s, and the ones who have just been freshly created, and they didn't even have a chance to think about the aspects beyond survival and figuring out how do they get accreditation, how do they move forward. And this is the moment for them to get that mentorship, which we also do for matching the more experienced organizations with the less experienced ones. And then we move towards how do we upkeep this? Because even though I formulated it as steps, they're not really consecutive. They happen at the same time and they're also circular. So all of this have to happen continuously. And the important aspect is to keep it going is collaborating, coordinating, and tracking it. The first thing we've done is we have evaluated the representation of women in the sector, because as it is said, you cannot improve what you cannot measure. Therefore, we have had a poll where we have asked Mine Action operators and other relevant organizations that can be UN organizations working in Mine Action and producers of equipment to submit the information on the representation of women, veterans, survivors of explosive ordnance, people with disabilities. And when it comes to women, there were quite some interesting observations. First of all, we see that 30% of the personnel, of the whole personnel, are women, which is a minority. Especially it is evident when we come into the field work, because out of all the sector, 77% of the workforce works in the field. However, out of the 100% of women, only 23% of them work in the field. But what is very good to see is the aspect of managerial positions, because that's what we usually talk about. It's not just about representation of women, but how are they engaged? What exactly they do? And out of 100% of people who are engaged in Mine Action, 15% of them take managerial positions. And that is true for women. Out of 100% of women who are already employed in Mine Action, 14% of them take managerial positions, which highlights an important thing for us. There is not a big issue of bringing women in Mine Action to the leadership roles. It is more the fact that women are not as present in Mine Action overall, that many of them do not see it as a career or don't even know that it exists as an opportunity for them. Therefore, something that we would be focusing on is spreading the word, informational campaigns, role models, and identifying the barriers. You can also see some other numbers that are usually important for people as representation in technical survey and clearance, explosive ordnance risk education. Of course, we still see that women are minority here, even though we do know quite well that gender diverse teams are more effective, they are more trusted, they operate better, and they reach more communities, especially when it comes to explosive ordnance risk education and the victim assistance. But the other aspects is something that we have to upkeep for the future. First of all, it's the cross-sectoral communication and coordination. Before this, as I said, Mine Action was quite isolated. And it is not too easy to step out of that, but it's also not too difficult. There are a lot of links and connections that we can build. For example, this year, the National Action Plan for Women, Peace and Security is coming to an end, and the new one is being developed. And for the first time, Mine Action is being included in Ukraine in the Women, Peace and Security Plan. In the same way, there is a Gender and Humanitarian Action Working Group that does a lot of work, and therefore we do not want to duplicate that effort. We want to collaborate, we want information exchange, and therefore we have a permanent representative of the group in the gender aspects in Mine Action, and we have a permanent representatives of us in there to be able to build up those links. And it also relates to all the other things. Everybody who is related is very welcome to join. And every link we can build to make sure that the humanitarian action, sustainability, women, peace and security, Mine Action, all move together and are complementary, we will do that. The second aspect follows the previous slide. it's getting the perspective of women in and outside of the sector. Because we have determined women are the minority, there's the lack of representation, but why does that happen? And there are two things that to consider here. One, that has been considered by DRC in their research on the gendered perspectives in mine action, is how do women who already work in the sector feel? What are the issues? What would they like to do? What would improve it? And how do men actually feel? How we can empower men to help empower women. And then there's a different aspect of people who don't work in mine action. Have they heard of it? Do they consider it? Why or why not? We have just had the preliminary results where, interestingly enough, along with, well, I just didn't know it was an opportunity and I thought it was dangerous, extremely dangerous, there's another answer of, well, I'm the primary caretaker for my kids while my husband is serving, so I need the childcare facility to be able to work in an environment like that. Well, these are just the primary results. Our partner FSD is working on a broader research that will highlight more the barriers that women face and the methods of overcoming them. And that will be on our agenda for this couple of years. After that, of course, we can't follow up with anything else but building those favorable conditions, because we are responsible for those who we invite to the sector. We cannot just encourage anybody to join, promise them the greatest things in their lives, and then just dump them into an environment that might be not very favorable. Therefore, we might create the conditions for those who join to also stay, to develop, to feel comfortable, to feel their growth and collaborate with the others. And then we will start advertising the career through the role models, through informational campaigns, because Ukraine has quite some female deminers, victim assistance specialists, explosive ordnance risk education specialists, and many great stories of women who, maybe being displaced, have returned to their homes to clear them for their children, to provide them a safe future, to find a new career, to build a home, and finally be able to return. Therefore, we also work with many women's rights organizations who help us prove that women's representation is just about the quantity. It's really about their quality of life. It's about our state. It's about safety, protection, and empowerment. So we are now aiming to, and I encourage you to do that as well, to not treat women in mine action as the side note. It should rather be a principle that knocks in at every aspect of the process. Because women are not just a group to be protected and facilitated, they are an inextricable element of building safety together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vlaslav, for sharing the experience in Ukraine, and in particular the progress in gender and mainstreaming in mine actions in Ukraine, and efforts to incorporate the WPS into strategies and programs and in mine action. Thank you so much. We really wanted to hear more about that. I believe that there is a lot of the challenges in the process. So now it's time to turn to the audience and to any questions or comments that you may have, and for our experienced and knowledgeable panelists. I would like to take some questions together and then ask to the panelists to respond. So now I would like to open the floor. Okay.
If I may. Thank you very
so
much.
Yes, please.
Oleg Stoyev, Mine Action Office Minister of Economy of Ukraine. And the question would go to our colleague from UNIDIR. The question would be the following. We know that there are quite a few UN agencies generally and in Ukraine as well, and most of them are engaged on the matters of mine action. We have a dedicated organization of the UN Women. At the same time, the Women, Peace and Security agenda is channeled through all the other organizations as well within their mandates. The question would be, do you see a focal person for the gender issues, at least on the country stage for Ukraine. I'm not asking for the context of the focal person, but more of the institution. Is that UN Women? Is it UNICEF? Is that the United National Resident Coordinator's Office? Is it the UNDR? Because frankly speaking, when we come to the matter of coordinating our action on the matters of women, peace and security, which is requested by our National Mine Action Strategy, which we have drafted, we feel that there could be a better coordination from the side of the international organizations, starting with the UN. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there any questions? Okay, please.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. My question goes, my name is Erika Mukai from JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency. My question goes to the lady, GRC of South Sudan, who explained her real situation remotely. You presented a lot of, needs and the challenges, but could you prioritize what would be the urgent needs from your point of view for the donors to support, women's officers who are working in the field or headquarters as well?
Okay, thank you so much. Is there any other questions? Okay, okay, please.
Yes, hello, Lasha Granger from Maria 8. I have a question for Vladislava. Vladislava, could you tell us whether there are any success stories and some of the qualitative data, for instance, which could include, I guess, resulting communication materials, whether there's something there on a governmental website for people to access and for us to recommend to people we work with in Mine Action.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'd like to give the floor to the panelists. The firstly, Benedict, can you respond to the Ukraine? Okay.
Is it open? Yeah. Thank you for your question. If I understood correctly, your question is who is the women, peace and security kind of focal point in Ukraine, right? Okay, so I cannot speak from the UN perspective because I'm only like a temporary consultant, right? But I can speak from a personal perspective because I did my PhD on the implementation of the WPS agenda in Eastern Europe, and Ukraine was part of my study. A short answer would be like at the UN level, definitely UN Women has like the most, it's part of their mandate, women, peace and security implementation. But I know that, the WPS landscape in Ukraine is very crowded in a positive sense, right? There is a lot of collaboration also with other international organizations, obviously the government, and also very strong grassroots Ukrainian feminist civil society. So a lot of CSOs and NGOs are collaborating. But at the UN level, definitely UN Women has that mandate. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Perfectly sufficient, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now I'd like to give the floor to the Abuk to respond the questions to you. I think you are muted.
Okay. I was like, your question was like what do you need the donors to help with? I did not understand the question. I think if the person is there, then you have to come up again with the question so I understand fully.
Yes, my question is, what is the most urgent, most priority needs which donors or international organizations should respond among a lot of challenges and the needs?
For our case, as you know, South Sudan is running out of, funds and a lot of issues. So we would request, like, when we create the network, it will attract like donors, in most organizations and in most cases, gender is always considered. But when female demanders are many, in organization and they create their own network where they will raise their issues, their challenges, and how they should progress. Mine action is a male-dominated industry, so if we give the women the opportunity, having their network, it will attract the donors, to also help us in fundings and a lot of things.
Thank you very much for Abuk. So now I'd like to give the floor to Bratislava to answer the third questions to Ukraine.
Thank you, Lisa, for this question, and especially because it gives me an opportunity to highlight the work of our partners and some successes. Of course, there's been a lot of success stories since the year 2014, when the first women miners started working in the field and women started sharing mine action programs. But I want to focus on the past couple of years, because before that, most of the successes, they are very subjective, since, as I mentioned, what we don't measure, we cannot track. Therefore, what we have definitely noticed is that with the institutionalizing of the aspect of women in mine action and bringing it to the attention, we have seen quite a sustainable interest and coordination in the work. I'll give you a few examples. Starting with the workshop on gender in mine action that we had with OSCE last year. After that, we have had this February a great cooperation with GICHD on gender diversity, equality, and inclusion, which we plan to repeat yearly in order to specifically track the progress. As a result of that workshop, we have received the recommendations and a sort of a to-do list for the sector, and also an indicator. Therefore, following through this, we will be able to track yearly of how we are doing in the sector. Do we just do things to check out the tick box, or do we actually make an impact? Another aspect of this is the coordination and organization stepping in. Now we have so many collaborations in the sector where people work on the polls, on the researchers. Now they started to coordinate informational campaigns to see whether they cover the regions that should be covered, whether they reach the target audience they should be reaching, whether the messaging is consistent when it comes to the engagement of women. We can definitely see that there is more attention to the topic, and the planning is now happening more long term. When we were talking previously about the few months projects, now we are looking a few years ahead, which means we're going for sustainability. And something I also personally want to mention is the fact that by bringing this into the discussion, by keeping up the narrative, we can see the impact even in the most rigid of stakeholders. You see women in mine action and gender seeping through the speeches, the documents, and any public commitments of the stakeholders that were previously quite resistant to inclusion of the topic. So the change is happening, and now we're first of all thankful to all our partners for collaborating on this. And now being able to track this, we want to be able to be back in a year with concrete results, examples, maybe some mistakes and lessons learned, but seeing what you've done, how it affects it, and how does it bring that equitable, equal, empowering future for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to open the floor again. And is there any questions from the floor? Okay, okay, please, ladies.
Thank you very much. My name is Mariam Hassan Gambo from Northeast Nigeria, working with Child Protection and Men Empowerment Initiative. It's a women-led grassroots organization. So as we mark this 25 years of the agenda, I just want to say simple. Women in places like ours are already doing the work. And we're leading risk education efforts, helping survivors, and then supporting communities that are still living with the consequences of conflict and contamination every day. But the truth is, there is a huge gap in Nigeria. Where we need it so urgent, we are working with limited resources and support we need, whether it's technical assistance, funding, or capacity building, just isn't reaching us fast and enough. We have solutions that work on the ground, but we need better support. Grow those solutions. Women-led organizations like ours play a bigger role, but we need to be empowered with the right tools, the right training, and more opportunities to collaborate. As we look ahead, let us work together and see this WPS not just as a theory, but truly creating space for us to lead and make a real difference in the lives of those we support, those that are most in need. Because women shouldn't just be participants, but also active in the design and then implementation of these processes. We shouldn't just be at the receiving end, but we should be at the decision-making table so that we talk about the need. Because from whatever perspective we looked at, women are at the center and are also at the receiving end. Whenever there are contaminations, women in the rural communities are always at the receiving end and are closer to the grassroots community, closer to the children that are most at risk and are much more vulnerable. So when women are part of these initiatives from the onset, then we see lasting result and then sustained solutions within the grassroots communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your powerful message. Do you want to respond from the panelists? No? Okay. Oh, yes, please. You want to respond? Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Yes, is there any other comments? And okay, Dominique, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks for all the really interesting presentations. My question is for Vladislava. It was really interesting seeing all the numbers up there on the screen about the participation. Given what we've heard about the participation goal also being about community participation and women participating in mine action at the community level, I saw that I think women's participation in NTS efforts from the community side are also really important. We've talked about how having women on NTS teams is a facilitator of that. But I saw in the numbers that it's about 20%, so 1 in 5 NTS team members at the moment is a woman in Ukraine. So I wondered if you had any initiatives or if you had any discussion about how to get that to a better level of gender balance so that we can facilitate better participation of women at the community level. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That is indeed one of the most important aspects in the NTS and explosive ordnance risk education, especially since in the deoccupied regions and the regions close to the front line, women are mostly constituting the biggest share of people living there. They're primary caretakers, they take care of kids, elders, and usually they are the ones who are at the receiving end, as was mentioned by our colleague. Of course, we do not exclude NTS from the promotion efforts, from the analysis efforts. At the same time, it is not also isolated as a separate, the most important subject. I will be honest with you, our focus was mostly on clearance and technical survey, because we find that it is much easier to engage women in explosive ordnance risk education and non-technical survey, as they feel more safe there and they feel less stigma about it. And it is also quite representational of the whole number of women in the sector. They're 30% of the whole force. So having around 20% in NTS shows that this is a more accessible field for them. However, we do intend on expanding that number. One consideration we had was in the process of standardization, of introducing the requirement of having a woman on the team. But then there's also the cost that you have to think about. Because if, as of now, we only have 1 in 5 NTS employees, if we introduce that requirement right now, we might effectively disable some of the teams and slow down the land release process. Therefore, it is currently introduced as a recommendation, as highly desirable, as necessary as much as possible. But our goal is that in a few years, we will be able to see at least equitable number of men and women on the teams. It is, of course, their preference of where they want to work more, but we do believe that there is career space and opportunity in each part of this, and it's up to women to see what works best for them.
So thank you so much. Is there any other comments? Please.
Yep, okay. I hope everybody can hear me. So my name is Sophia. I'm from International Humanitarian Demining Academy in Ukraine. And I also studied sociology as my bachelor. And I have a question more about data collection and that points. But yeah, so as a question, what innovative approaches are being developed to collect that comprehensive gender data on the impacts of for example, explosive ordnance, and how are organizations addressing the persistent gaps in understanding these gendered impacts? Because I understand that in each country or each organization has their own indicators or questionnaires and points how to measure impact and involvement of women in humanitarian demining.
Thank you very much. You'd like to ask the specific panelists?
I guess if speakers, a few of them or one of them would answer or want to answer, I would like to hear it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So Benedict, you have the floor.
Yes, thanks for your question. So about data collection, right? Very briefly, I would say that this is a huge problem, but this is not like unique to mine action sector at all. But I remember working on a report 2 years ago with Mines Action Canada on, like, we were trying to track how many women were working in mine action, right, in different sector. And one kind of result is that by surveying different mine action partners, it was really, really difficult because each organization were tracking and collecting data, you know, according to their own like structure and employment like policies. And so it was super difficult to compile them for me and also compare them, right? Because not everyone was compiling or data like disaggregated by gender or by age, like both, right? And some organizations were also compiling data disaggregated by like race, for example, or region, like location, even one organization by like indigeneity. So it was, yeah, just to say, very, very challenging because there's not one system, like coherent, uniform way of collecting data. So that's definitely super challenging. Because it's essential for research.
Okay, Bratislava, you have the floor.
Thank you. To follow up on that, first of all, being in one action sector, you might have noticed that we use the word innovative quite freely. And what we call innovative in one action is usually used quite widely in the other sectors, especially when it comes to data collection. Therefore, I completely agree with Benedict. Each organization has their own methods and their own reasons to gather in data. For example, in Ukraine, you would have the minimal requirements set by the National Mine Action Authority and the Mine Action Center, which are quite easy. For example, when we are talking about victim assistance, they would be disaggregating into men and women, boys and girls. But some international NGOs, they would have the need to divide them also in older people, in middle-aged people. for whatever different reasons they might have, because it really depends on their program, on the particular projects that might have, and so on. And that brings us to a wider question of what Benedict has mentioned, the interoperability of the data. It is the problem worldwide, it is an issue in Ukraine and in quite many other contexts, because it exists for different reasons, at different stakeholders, in different kinds of measurements. So that is quite a big thing for all of us to address, and I would actually be quite happy if we would be able to spend even more time at the NDM to be able to work on this.
So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. So now I'm a bit conscious of the time, so I'd like to give the floor to all the panelists again for the final brief comment and also the key takeaway from this side event. So from the Jean.
Great. Well, I certainly learned a lot from the fellow panelists, and there was a number of really good practices shared about how to integrate, particularly interested in the victim assistance where we haven't seen this so systematically done. I think there's lots of ways forward for how to bring WPS and victim assistance together. I was really interested to hear as well from a book on this new group that's being based in South Sudan to really address the challenges that women deminers are having. So really appreciate a book for your insight there. And of course, Vladislava, you've really brought us to another level of understanding of how to bring WPS and mine action together. So thank you very much to the other panelists. I think we have a long ways to go, but great to see these concrete actions in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panelists and also to the audience. I don't have much to add, I guess, but maybe I just wanted to add something to my presentation is that it is important to mention, I think, that the WPS framework is being incredibly challenged at the moment, and also like as a lens, as a framework, it can have many limitations, right? It can be seen as an exclusive framework that excludes, for example, men or boys or people of diverse gender identity. So it's really important also to address issues related to masculinities in victim assistance as well. Well, not just victim assistance, but all pillars of humanitarian mine action, right? Because, yeah, WPS and gender is not only about women. And we know, again, from empirical evidence that masculinity impacts all pillars of mine action. So I just wanted to add that, but otherwise, thank you so much. I also learned a lot.
Being in this diverse panel in a room, it just highlights for me the importance of collaboration, especially with what Benedict has said. We have all witnessed what happens when one or a few stakeholders have the biggest ownership of a particular topic or for a particular aspect. And therefore, I would call you all to take ownership of mine action, of diversity, of representation, because what would take one person's lifetime would only take a fraction of time for each of us, having 800 people in the room. Therefore, if all of us feels responsible for it, with little effort, we can make quite some important changes. Thank you.
Thank you. And Abuk, can I ask you to final comments? You are muted.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate being here. I really appreciate. And to put on my last comment, I would really like, and I'm really looking forward for the benefits of this meeting, and I really hope the benefits will really come out from here, because something that has been discussed and and that has been placed, it's always good that one has presented what she or they are going through. And I am also looking forward as South Sudan. You know, in the sector, we are really few. Women, we are really few. We are not as many as maybe in Ukraine and other countries. You know, we are few. So I would really like if we bring in more women, you know, to participate in the industry, you know, because the industry is really helping us, you know, it's advocating and, you know, it's really helping us, you know. And, you know, as I joined this demining, I only completed senior 4, but when I joined, I'm able to you know, to go for further studies, and I'm also operating, and that is also another benefit of being in this industry. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the panelists. I'd like to thank again for all participants to this side event, and give a special thanks for all panelists and the organizers. And we'd like to continue this discussion at the intersessional meeting of the Interpersonal Mind Bank Convention this June, and to explore concrete approaches and initiatives together with all the stakeholders. So I hope you all found these discussions useful and timely. And with this, I close this event and wish you all the best and to have a nice lunch. Thank you so much.